August meeting of the Finance Committee of the City Council, City of Newcastle, is going to come to order pursuant to public notice. Kathy, if you call the roll, please.
Barstow,
Here.
Walter,
Here.
Powell,
Here. We're joined this evening by Mr. Nicholson. Good evening. Mr. Nicholson, looks like we got some items on the agenda, so if you could start off.
Okay.
please.
2019 budget update. The departments are currently working on both capital and operating budget proposals. The capital should be wrapping up. Nate's already turned his in. I would expect public service to be in shortly, and all the other providers to give it to me around the same time. So once we get that, we'll be able to put together and propose the CIP and see how that falls into the operating budget. Again, they have the operating budget models at this time and are working on, the other stuff, supplies, materials, smaller dollar equipment purchases and the like. So we're still on track. Things are looking really good. I've gotten a lot of good feedback, meaning that they're working on it, so I don't have any concerns at this point. I'm getting questions, which is always a good thing. When you get questions during a process, it means they're looking at it and they're moving forward. Revenue projections have been prepared as well. So once we get the capital and the operating, we'll have a better idea of where fund balances look and what moving around we need to do.
Okay.
So again, things are moving along really well on the budget.
Okay. Anybody else have anything on the budget? Members? Okay, thanks. Thanks, Jamie.
Yep. Supplemental appropriation. I know we just had a supplemental that went through. It was brought to our attention that the OPWC, the Columbia Road Culvert, there was a change order. This was a 2017 budgeted project, and we did a purchase order for the amount of the contract. So we carried that over into the current year. The problem is the rest of the budget lapsed as of December 31st because it wasn't encumbered. So we lost that budget. It went back into the fund balance and is available for appropriation again this year. They did a change order for about $20,000, of which I think around 16 of that is covered by OPWC. It's like an 80-20, 20% local, 80% OPWC. So the $16,000 of the $20,000 expenditure will be OPWC covered. It's a net increase of $4,000. And you'll see in the appropriation, there'll be a $4,000 transfer from the street fund to the OPWC fund, and then I'll increase the revenue by the transfer and the grant revenue. So it's grant accounting, it's kind of a pain, but bottom line is just it's an increase of $4,000. But it's still well within the original. In 2017, when we budgeted the cost of the project, it's still way below that. So
It's a budget item. It's a 17 budget item. We just never were asked to appropriate the money, and so we
yeah, if we had known then, we would have carried over the extra $20,000, but we didn't know.
Anybody else have any?
Jamie, I seem to recall that was on a supplemental. Wasn't there a $30,000?
There were, and I wish Alan were here, he could probably explain it better. There were multiple Columbia Road culverts,
Well, no, there's a culvert and bridge.
but my understanding was there were multiple culverts, plus we had to play like monkey move up. There was a Mill Street culvert budget item that we.
Right, which we non-performed the Mill Street.
Right.
Right.
And specific culverts, gonna have to refer to Alan.
Because I thought we did a $30,000 change order on that one. That was my recollection.
I seem to recall that as well, but we
Okay.
don't have,
Yeah, we'll have to wait and
we'll have to
see.
talk about
Yeah.
it Monday.
If you,
and
I guess
get an
what we could do is ask that, Joe, you look into that to see that there wasn't some kind of confusion between the multiple projects.
Yeah, it was my understanding that there were multiple Columbia Road culverts, and this is the only one that was OPWC. The other one was a city funded project. But I'll talk down. So on Monday night we'll have an answer for you on that.
It won't be the first time we've had confusion over which culvert we're fixing
Or which parking lot?
Which parking lot we're paving, which is what I was thinking of, so, yes. Anybody else have anything on item 4? Great. Okay, internal control audit.
I wasn't here at the last council meeting when this meeting was set, so I'm not really sure where you want me to go with this.
Well, I can try to help some, I'm talking about charter provision 6.02E, the new charter provision. So it's an independent control audit of all city accounts that has to occur every 6 years. At least, and it has to be done by, by a CPA. So we're trying to identify exactly what that is and who can do that. I know Mr. Walter thought he might have had some leads on that, but I'll let,
Yeah, so the person I had spoken with is not able to be here tonight, although I can say that he has spoken to our auditors because he knows them. They got in contact together, not through my work, but, obviously, our auditors reached out to him to see what was going on and.
They audit the New Albany
They
community.
do. So he has a little bit of a conflict there, and he's concerned about, doing that. But anyhow, he's talked with Nick and went through essentially what his thoughts were about an internal control audit. Granted, it seems like, and I've been trying to do research myself on this, but it seems like it is hard to find an internal control audit for governmental entities. It's not hard to find for, I guess, everybody else in the world. But it seems like the stuff that was sent over by Nick and the stuff that I had sent to the committee kind of lays it out and explains it to some degree. I don't know if you had a chance to look at any of it.
there was a
Did you have a chance to look
a
at it?
university.
Briefly.
So what I sent over were basically 2 checklists. What Jamie had, the auditor sent to us was essentially so I'm gonna say this nicely to CPAs, but CPAs have to have a chart. It's like an attorney. They gotta have charter and verse. So they gotta have, this is what they follow and this is their standards and so forth. So what Jamie had sent over was really their standards for doing an internal control audit. The 5 principles with the 17 sections and so forth of what an internal control audit does. This is just my review of it. What I sent over was something from Ohio State, which is essentially a checklist that can be put together for an audit committee. And then the University of Florida, this was an audit they performed. And again, it's a checklist of questions and kind of, in theory, a check through of how the control or the management works to control in and out of all kinds of things. So I think, Todd, what we had talked about initially, or Jamie, in the last meeting was, well, what is it? That was kind of the discussion, was what is it? And I think you sent out an email saying that you didn't know, you needed more direction on what council was thinking or what this committee was thinking, right? Essentially, in a nutshell.
Where the confusion comes in is like those checklists. That's what we currently go through with our auditors. So I'm unclear. Let me, if you don't mind, let me kind of step back and kind of give you some background. In all our processes, whether it's payroll, cash handling, any number of the areas of focus for internal controls, right? Expenditures, budgetary, we do a narrative. So it's literally talking to the auditor saying, okay, cash receipts, here's where we get cash receipts, here's how the process works, here's who handles the cash, who records the cash, who deposits the cash, do the whole thing. They then walk those narratives through a selected number of transactions, and I don't know the exact numbers because it depends on their comfort level and statistical sampling. So they go through that and they work through the process. They also sit down with myself and Janice and go through a lot of these types of questions. So that's where kind of the confusion is, because as a part of the audit, they do test internal controls as a part of it. Now, what they don't do is test, let's say there's, I don't know what the number is, let's say there's 8 key areas of internal controls. Like in the one checklist, you kind of can go through them, there's probably 10 or 12. They don't necessarily test all 10 in any one year. They may take, it's kind of like a 3-year cycle. So they may pick 3 or 4 of them in one year, the next 3 or 4 the next year, and then the next year, actually testing the controls. That's not to say that they're not auditing and making sure that things tick and tie. They're just, as far as the controls are working, they test those on a cycle basis. So that's where the confusion, I guess, comes in. If we're looking at testing all of the key categories of internal controls every 5 or 6 years, then I guess also the question is it every fund? When it says every account, is it every fund? Is it literally every GL count in every fund? And then what year is it? What time period is it for? Because if we're looking at 5 years, do we go all 5 years? Are we talking the most current year in the audit? So there's a lot of kind of nebulousness is the best description I could put in terms of what exactly this is trying to achieve. I'm happy to help get us where we need to be. I just not sure what that is.
I think the flavor of the charter review was at the maximum, once every 6 years, an internal control review is done. Not of all the previous 5 years, but that one, a sampling is done. And because it also says you can do them every 3 years. At the maximum, you could do them every 3 years. So that would, I think, it would answer the first question. It's not the previous 3 years that we're concerned, but you could do them on a yearly basis, just like the city does a yearly audit,
Mhm.
right? This would be in addition to that yearly audit, then there'd be this internal control audit. And what you hit on was exactly what the committee was talking about, was for instance, how are big changes handled? And we'll just use one that happened here last year. Insurance changes. When you move from one insurance company to the other insurance company, we've still got some of the old payments that have to be done to catch up, from last year. What did you guys call those? The runouts, right? So this internal control would be like, well, how is that handled? How is that done when you make big changes? Another one would be, large expenditures. They didn't set a number, but we talked about when you go through a process for bidding purposes, do you see a lot of expenditures that are right under the bidding threshold? That kind of question, and how is that handled? And then the last one was, that kind of the major issue was, are there any open-ended accounts? Open accounts meaning, and I can use one that I've seen before, the mechanic for the city who works on cars. It seems like a car is sent there, PO's developed after the car's diagnosed, which makes
Not
sense.
typically.
But
Not
is there
typically.
anything like that? Is there a contractor that's, for lack of a better term, has an undefined contract and it just kind of gets filled as you go? And if that is so, if there is something like that, how is that handled? Those were the concerns of the committee when they were going through. It wasn't go back for 5 years and do every year's sampling. That wasn't the point. That would have been astronomically expensive, and it probably would have taken 5 years to do that.
Right. Now, I would see this, though, as being a relationship between the auditors and council.
Well, and then there's
Because, quite frankly, the routine audit is my responsibility to make sure that they get the audit and the information they need. And supporting them would be fine, but I feel like and I take no offense, because I know how this works with auditing and stuff, that you're basically verifying that what I'm telling you is true, and that we're doing the right things and we're doing the job. Again, I take no offense at that. I understand that's we get audited. Auditors question us all the time. But given that, when we get to that point, I think this needs to be a relationship between those two parties, and they report to you, and they don't report to me, because obviously if there's any kind of thing that pops up, that's how internal audit would work anyway. If you're hiring an internal audit firm or have internal audit, they would report to management anyway.
I appreciate Mr. Walter's comment, because he obviously was on the charter commission, the charter review, but those were not put into the charter.
That's correct.
What we have a charter provision that says the council, so I agree with everyone that says this is council's responsibility, this is not the administration's responsibility to get a contract and then come to council and say, hey, approve this contract for Julian and Drew to do our audit. It's an independent audit, internal audit control of all city accounts, so every account, however the auditors define that. I'm not an auditor or a CPA, but it has to occur every 6 years, although we can do it more frequent. I think that implies that the every 6 years would be for the audit that was done in 2018 would be for the 2017 year, because if and I agree with Mr. Walton, it'd be crazy to go back 5 years, then we just do it every year, if we're to do it every 6 years. This is supposed to be just as our current audit is a statistical sampling, and then if they find problems, they keep looking. This is every 6 year sampling of what we're doing, but it has to be all city accounts. It's got to be every single one, and it has to be done by a CPA, who is, has no interest in the fiscal affairs of the city. So, and we can there's some other language about how we can do without a competitive bid, but, so I think that's something we have to do. It's gotta be all of the accounts, and it has to be done at least every 6 years, so, I think that what we need to do is, and I would look to the auditors and the CPAs to develop this as to what they would envision this being, and then coming to us with a proposal. Now, I don't know if we can use Julian and Grube to do this, if we can do that, or if we have to get somebody else, so.
If I could,
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
I agree 100% with you, Todd, that it is, I think, councils to do. When I read through all this stuff, it always seems they're talking about an audit committee. And I think, I kind of view the finance committee as that kind of that audit committee that's gonna look at the audit that happens. I agree, it doesn't go to Jamie, it would go to some form of council representation, whether that the finance committee or all the way to council to begin with. But, I mean, it sets it up pretty clearly in this, section 940. I mean, it's a how-to, it's a recipe on how to do it, in my opinion, when I read through it. And I think even further, to go further with that is, one of these checklists could be developed by this committee for this internal review. And it could apply to all, as the charter says, all of the departments.
one of there's a couple things. One, when you mentioned some of the various items like open-ended contracts or the like, that's the kind of information that would not standardly be looked at by an auditor, because they're looking at where did we spend the money, did we have budgetary appropriations, the like, all those types of things. That would be the kind of information that whatever group would be meeting with the auditors would say, hey, here are some things we'd like you to look for. Now, there's two approaches basically that this would look like in talking to our auditors. The first approach is what's called agreed upon procedures, which is the auditor says, okay, you tell the auditor, we want you to test the following. We want you to test 300 transactions in all accounts, each of the accounts, whatever. Look for open-ended contracts. Make sure that council approved all supplemental appropriations. You guys would give that information, and they charge you based on that effort. What you end up with is a report that says we've tested all of this, and we've either found nothing or we found these things. This is the information. There's no opinion. There's no. I mean, this is the result of our agreed upon procedures. School districts frequently use those for booster clubs, band boosters, football clubs, whatever, because you have residents, parents running the finances, and it's really under the school's auspices, but yet you hear the theft, you hear the fraud. So they'll say, we'd like you to go in and audit the band boosters' books for the last year. And that's the agreed upon procedure. The other approach would more involve the auditor of state, because most local government, well, currently, according to the Auditor of State's office, this is a new thing for governments. We would be one of the first. So the Auditor of State would want to weigh in, because what would happen is there would actually be an opinion letter issued like we have for our financial statements. So currently when they audit our financial statements, they issue an opinion that says that they've audited them in conformance with GAAP and all the other verbiage they put in there. And basically, either the financial statements are, conform in all material respects and are accurate, right? So that's what they do. They don't issue an opinion. They'll tell you that they, as part of their audit, they reviewed the internal controls, and basically, if something was identified during that review process, then that issue was raised. But they don't issue an opinion. This would be good. Take that to the next step, and they'd actually issue an opinion on the internal controls. So it's two different approaches. From a cost perspective, I will tell you that the opinion is going to cost you more because there's professional liability, so they're going to dig more, spend more time, and that's fine. It's just a different approach. So that's some of the other things when the auditors, and Nick apologized for not being able to come tonight. I was on vacation last week, or I was on vacation 2 weeks ago when this was scheduled, and when I came back I tried to get a hold of him. He was on vacation, so we talked today and they just couldn't make it work. But they're happy to meet with us, whenever you guys want to set a time, and we'll make it work.
Well, the first approach is them going and doing the audit and saying, here's the issues we found, and just pushing that to us. The second approach is them saying, here are the issues we found, here's what we think you guys should do in order to fix them. Essentially, or
It's more of the audit opinion, a specific agreed upon procedure is basically, it's, you're asking them to look at certain accounts, certain activity for certain things. And that's what they're gonna drill into. Payroll, let's say payroll, you pick payroll. That all overtime is approved by the supervisors. So then they would go in and they would look at all overtime, make sure all timesheets that had overtime were approved by a supervisor. And if they found no exceptions, that was not, where there was no, like the one time where a supervisor didn't approve a timesheet, they would tell you on this one payroll, this one individual, the supervisor didn't approve the overtime. That would be in their report to you, so you would know. And it would either be there's no instances or we found these instances in relation to that. The other one, unless it is a compliance issue with ORC, if in a regular audit, let's say, they find that we didn't do something in accordance with ORC, we're not making our deposits in a timely fashion. We hold the bank and we do it all the last day of the week. And so that would be an ORC, a violation, and they would put that in their citation letter in our audit. They'd say, here it is, and basically you need to fix it by the next audit. And so then the next audit, they look at it. I would envision if it's an audit opinion on the internal control, it would be a separate findings letter, or citations basically, that if it was an ORC kind of violation, but I don't know what else it would look like, to be perfectly honest, because it's so new for us.
So we need to have, has anybody transmitted Andy's information to Julian Groot?
I did this afternoon.
Okay.
The
So they need-
two,
they
the
need- Okay, but they need time to take a look at it, so I think where we are is we need to, we can use them to do this, I think.
Mhm.
So what we need to do is set up, or is, here, let them digest this, I think, and then get back to Jamie. And can you reach out to them, and say, hey, what do you guys think? Is this something you can do? Can we
Right.
get together and with the committee? And, because I agree with Andy that the finance committee is the logical choice to get this together.
At least give it a start.
And get it going, and then obviously it's gotta go to full council for approval, because we gotta appropriate money for this, so.
I would agree with you, Andy, on when you said, talk about the finance committee being the audit committee, because for all intents and purposes, we're too small. You form an audit committee when you're a larger government, multi-division, and there's just so much stuff, the audit committee can focus on that. We're small enough, we're transparent enough that it's easy for a finance committee to handle the audit. So it's
It's kind of how when I read this, that's kind of how it fit, was that we'd set up a checklist, if we do a checklist or whatever they would suggest.
Yeah, maybe Julian Group can come up, I leave it to their expertise, if they have
Yeah.
a check, if they have some items, they can share it with us and we can talk about it, so.
But this information was very good. I mean, it really, I read through it and got a really good flavor for what, just hearing what I had heard during the charter review committee and then this, I think that that's their meshing. That's what they're looking, that was what the idea was.
And the cost will be driven by, obviously the amount of hours. So the more transactions that are sampled, the bigger, the more depth, the more information that's reviewed, obviously the higher the cost is going to be. And again, if you go the agreed upon procedures route, then they'll probably be less than if you go for a full-fledged audit opinion. And again, with the audit opinion, the auditor state has already said that basically their office would need to be involved in how that would look like. Because we would be the first and others might follow after us. And so they want to make sure that we're doing it right, I guess.
We are a trendsetter.
No.
I do have one more question. Can you just, when I was reading this, I was a little bit confused when they talk about the engagement. So this is kind of, scope is how I read that as, this is the engagement, this is what they're gonna do. And it really says that the auditors set this up, but at the same time, I'm looking at it on another piece of the information where the internal audit committee, the committee is setting it up, and then the auditor is essentially agreeing to it. Which is the more effective route, do you think?
I mean, typically in the audit, first off, in Ohio, the auditor state's office controls the audit. And these are IPAs, they're independent public auditing firms. So they have to comply with whatever the auditor state wants us to task, to look at. Generally, the scope of the audit is driven by size, complexity, and just basically, the first year, obviously, the audit, that they're on an audit job, I can assure you we spent a lot of time face to face because they don't know anything about us. So we spend a lot of time going through our processes, our controls, our procedures. And then, you know, the scope of the audit stays the same, but the amount of effort for them becomes less because they're just retesting things that perhaps they already tested 2 or 3 years ago. But I think that from a scope of the engagement, again, it depends if it's an agreed upon procedures or a full-blown audit of, you know, of transactions. You're wanting an audit opinion, that's the conversation you guys are gonna have with the auditors to figure out the nature of the scope. Because you're gonna wanna have a pricing up front, you know, and a price not to exceed, because obviously this could be fairly expensive depending on the level of staff involved.
Well, I think that in the materials that Mr. Walter has, when they have an audit committee, I was assuming that in a larger organization, that would be made up of folks who work in the financial aspect of the organization, whether it's private or public. And that's not us, on the finance committee. So I would think we would lean more heavily on what the auditor suggests as areas to look at to satisfy the charter provision. And then help us develop a checklist or come up with a better checklist of things that they can do. I don't wanna say to them, well, we want you to perform this function and have them say, well, we can't perform that function. Or we can perform that function if you pay us, you know, $150,000. We'll perform any function as long as we get paid.
Or perform the function, but you're not really gonna get the information you
Exactly,
desire.
yeah, you'll get nothing out of it. You'll get nothing out of it than you're already getting, so, okay, yeah. So, ICDA, I think we get Andy's materials up to Julian and group, I think we already have. Let them get back to us, and if, Gene, if you could kind of bird dog them a little bit,
Yep.
so we can get them back in here and, find what they can do for us.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, for example, like Ohio State, right? Their audit committee is gonna be people probably, you know, non-board members, are
Mhm.
probably gonna be, you know, CPAs
Mhm.
or CEOs of companies in the community
Mhm.
who have the expertise and the knowledge and can speak to that.
One last question. On the, I'm just trying to review, Jamie, I think you'd mentioned that our auditors, this is their last year for doing audit, is that correct?
No, let's see, we got an extension, I think 18 and 19. So 17 was the first year of the extension, it was a 3-year extension, so I think it's 17, 18, and 19.
So what I guess I'm getting at is if this internal one is done for, I'm just gonna throw out there hypothetically, year 20, these guys could actually be very independent and very familiar with the information, so I think that's probably a good idea to get them kind of on board to help put together a kind of a game plan.
Because the charter provision became effective in 2017, so technically, we don't have to have this done until 2023, that's 6 years.
True.
We'd like to get it, I don't wanna wait until November of 2022 to figure it out, that's why I'm glad we're doing it now, so. Well, we were talking about paving parking lots earlier, that's exactly what we want to avoid. But yeah, I think if we get the information to them, they can continue to help us, or maybe if they feel they can't do it, or they have a conflict, or, and they can only do these audits for so long, there's a limit, we have to go to somebody else, they can steer us to somebody else that can do it for us.
A name that came up that I heard today was Kaiser Consulting. Have you ever heard of Kaiser? Okay, just one that does this kind of stuff, that's all, and I was looking into it, so they may be very familiar with them, I don't know.
And one of the things that, you know, depends if it's an audit opinion, you know, again, because the auditor state is overseer of all audits, so we're a little unique in that perspective. So whether they would be able to do with an audit opinion, do the auditor state's office, I don't know. That'd be the only question I would have, but
I can do a little bit more,
Yep.
digging,
if they're already doing public audits, then that
Right.
wouldn't be a problem.
that's what I understood, yeah, so.
Okay, anybody else have anything on the, internal control, number 5? No? Okay, anybody have any other business?
One thing real quick, I think Thursday end of day is the deadline for the banking services RFP. Park has turned theirs in, I'm waiting on probably up to 2 more, so I think we'll probably have 3 proposals, and I'll spend some time reviewing those, and I'll get out to everybody what it looks like.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have anything else? No, great, okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned.
Second.
Yep, call roll, please.
Barstow?
Yes,
Walter?
Yes?
Howe?
Yes.
meeting adjourned, thank you. Thanks, gentlemen.